Marcus Ellison was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the quiet engine behind his wife's rise to the top floor. To her board, her investors, and the polished circle of professionals she called her network, Marcus was simply Denise's husband, a mild-mannered operations manager with a company truck, a sensible haircut, and a tendency to arrive at her corporate events 15 minutes early so he could help the catering staff unload. He smiled politely. He shook hands without force. He laughed when he was supposed to laugh. She fired him on a Tuesday. A clean termination letter, drafted by her company's legal team, with a severance package that assumed he'd be grateful for the number. 2 weeks later, she handed him a second document, divorce papers, prepared even before the termination, signed and notarized, and waiting only for his signature. She sat across from him at their kitchen table, the table he had refinished himself with teak oil and 3 evenings of patient sanding, and she spoke to him the way you speak to someone who has already stopped mattering. What Denise did not know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus had spent 7 of those 11 years building something she had never thought to ask about. $44 million held across 3 private holding companies, none of which bore his name or hers. What she also did not know was that every senior member of her executive team, every board seat she occupied, and every contract that kept her company solvent had arrived in her life through a channel she had never thought to trace. She thought she was ending a marriage. She was ending a decade of borrowed infrastructure she didn't know she'd borrowed. What happened next would cost Denise Ellison everything she believed she had built. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning Marcus received the termination letter, he sat in the small workshop behind the house for 40 minutes before going inside. The workshop was his, a 10 by 12 space he had framed and drywalled and wired over the course of 2 summers, with a pegboard wall where every tool hung in a deliberate place and a single drop light that threw gold across the workbench when the sun came in at a particular angle in the early hours. He was pressing a hand plane across a section of white oak, working with the grain, and the curls of wood came up clean and unbroken the way they do when the blade is set exactly right. His grandmother had told him once, "A man who knows his tools knows himself." She had said it without ceremony, while sorting dried beans at her kitchen table in Memphis, and at the time he was 9 years old and didn't know what she meant. He understood it now. Marcus had grown up in Charlotte, the son of a machinist father and a schoolteacher mother, raised in a neighborhood where the houses were modest but the yards were cared for, and the people knew each other's names. He had gone to NC State on a partial academic scholarship, studied industrial engineering, and spent a decade working in operations for a mid-sized logistics firm before Denise's company had hired him as a consultant 11 years ago. He had been good at it. He had been very good at it. He met Denise on the 4th week of that consulting engagement. She was 34, and already sharp in the way that people are when they have been told they are exceptional for long enough to believe it. She was also genuinely funny in those early days, and she laughed at things other people in her orbit were too composed to laugh at, and she had asked him real questions, and listened to the answers, and that had counted for something. They were married inside of 2 years. He remembered the afternoon he proposed, a Saturday in late October, on the back porch of a rental cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, with the light failing early, and the leaves going copper and red along the ridge, and her hands cold when he took them in his. She had said yes before the question finished leaving his mouth. That had been real. He was clear enough, even now, to know that part had been real. The company truck that was no longer his sat in the driveway. He would return it Monday. But it was Friday, and the tool he was holding had been in his family since his grandfather bought it at a hardware store in 1971, and the wood he was working was going to become the top rail of a cabinet he had promised a neighbor. And for now he stayed in the workshop and worked the plane across the oak, and did not think about Denise's lawyers. He was home early on a Thursday when the first piece arrived. He had been scheduled to travel to a site outside of Greensboro, a final site visit as part of his transition out. But the visit was canceled, and he did not notify the house. He pulled into the driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon and saw a car he recognized in the side street, but which had no business being there on a weekday afternoon. A dark blue sedan belonging to Craig Pemberton, Denise's deputy director of operations, her subordinate of 6 years, the man Marcus had spent 11 months convincing her to hire. He sat in his own truck for 11 minutes. His hands rested flat on his thighs. His face registered nothing. He went inside through the side door and moved through the kitchen without making noise, and stood in the hallway for a moment and heard what he heard. He did not open the door. He turned around, walked back through the kitchen, went to his workshop, and sat on the stool beside the workbench with the stillness of a man performing a technical assessment. His hands didn't shake. He went back inside 40 minutes later, when the blue sedan was gone, and Denise was in the kitchen making noise with dishes and speaking to him normally about dinner. And he answered her normally, and set his jacket over the back of a chair, and helped her with the salad, and said things that were appropriate, and nothing more. That evening, after she was asleep, he went to his laptop and pulled up the account management portal for the security system he had installed himself 18 months ago, including a doorbell camera and 2 exterior motion-triggered units along the side and rear of the house. He reviewed 3 weeks of footage. He found 8 separate visits. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his actions. He forwarded the relevant files to a cloud storage account Denise did not know existed. Then, he opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Denise. He made 1 phone call the following morning. The number belonged to Patricia Okafor, an attorney he had retained 6 years ago for matters Denise had never been a party to. Patricia picked up on the second ring. "I need to move to phase 2, Marcus said. "I'll clear Thursday," she said. There was no surprise in her voice. There was never surprise in Patricia's voice. They met in her office on the 22nd floor of a building in uptown Charlotte that Denise had passed 100 times without noticing who owned it. Patricia was 61, with reading glasses she wore only when reviewing documents and a stillness in her face that Marcus had always respected. She laid the footage on her desk and reviewed it without comment. She reviewed the bank records Marcus had already compiled. 11 months of incremental transfers from their joint account to a secondary account Marcus had traced through the transaction codes she hadn't bothered to alter. $67,400 over 11 months. Not rushed. Deliberate, she had been planning it for nearly a year before she handed him the termination letter. "The severance offer is an insult," Patricia said. "We will decline it." "Yes," Marcus said. "The forensic accountant can have a preliminary report by next Wednesday. The pattern here is clear enough." "I know." She set her glasses down and looked at him directly. "Marcus, the marital asset disclosure she filed lists nothing related to Ellison Logistics Consulting, nothing connected to the 3 holding companies, and nothing from the contract portfolio. Her attorneys filed based on what she told them. She told them what she knew," Marcus said. Which was not very much. Patricia held his gaze for a long moment. "Real power operated in quiet rooms," she said quietly, and Marcus recognized it as something his grandmother might have said, and he simply nodded. His uncle Raymond came down from Richmond the following weekend. Raymond Ellison was 66, a retired civil engineer who had designed water treatment infrastructure for 3 municipalities and who had known Marcus longer than anyone on earth except his mother. They sat on the back porch of a house Raymond owned that Denise had visited twice and never thought about again. And Raymond poured 2 glasses of sweet tea from a pitcher and didn't say anything for a while, which was his habit. "She put Craig's name on her operating account," Raymond said eventually. "Did you know that?" "When?" "About 10 months ago. Small role, listed as a financial signatory. Brenda found it while she was pulling the public filings." Brenda was Raymond's daughter, a forensic accountant who worked for a firm in D.C., and who had been consulting quietly with Patricia since Marcus made his call on Friday morning. "What else?" Marcus said. "Craig had a business debt issue going back 4 years. A failed commercial real estate deal. He's been servicing that debt on a salary that doesn't support it." Raymond turned his glass in his hand. He needed her income to look a certain way. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She thought she was using him," he said. "She was also being used," Raymond said. "But she's the one who signed the documents. Some things were worth the patience to understand completely." Marcus went home that same Sunday evening and cooked dinner while Denise reviewed contracts at the kitchen island and made a phone call he pretended not to hear. He plated the food. He asked about her day. He listened to the answer. He refilled her glass when it got low. His face was the face of a man at peace with his life. She looked at him once with something that might have been guilt, and might have been pity, and might have been neither, and he smiled easily and passed her the bread, and the evening passed without incident. He was performing nothing. He was simply finished performing for her. 3 days passed. By Friday morning, Brenda's preliminary report was on Patricia's desk, and Marcus had reviewed it in full. The transfers were documented across a 14-month span. Craig Pemberton's signature appeared on 3 documents that redirected vendor payments through a shell structure that benefited him directly while being attributed, on paper, to Denise's discretionary budget. She had signed off on the budget without reviewing the line items. She had been sloppy in the way that people are sloppy when they believe they are the smartest person in the room. The forensic accountant's summary was 13 pages of very quiet, very specific destruction. The reckoning took place on a Wednesday in the conference room of Patricia's firm, and Denise arrived believing she was attending a mediation session to negotiate the final terms of their divorce. She came with her attorney, a man named Whitfield, and she sat down at the table with the composure of someone who had already decided how this meeting would end. She did not expect to see Raymond there. She did not expect Brenda, who sat beside Patricia with a bound copy of the forensic report in front of her. She did not expect Marcus's mother, who sat quietly at the far end of the table and did not need to say a word because her presence said all of it. Denise adjusted her posture and met Marcus's eyes and did not find what she was looking for. Patricia opened without preamble. She laid the financial disclosure documents Denise had submitted on the table and placed beside them Brenda's report and 3 supplemental exhibits. She walked through the 14 months of transfers. She walked through Craig Pemberton's financial structure and the 3 documents bearing Denise's signature. She noted, in a tone of complete clinical neutrality, that the legal threshold for marital asset fraud in the state of North Carolina was considerably lower than the numbers on the table. Denise's attorney leaned in and spoke quietly to her. Her face had been composed when she entered the room. It was not composed now. Patricia then placed a second set of documents on the table. Marcus watched Denise reach for the first page, and he watched the moment she read the name at the top of the holding company and understood what it meant. She turned 3 pages. She stopped. Ellison Logistics Consulting Group holds a controlling interest in 14 of the 17 contracts currently active in your company's portfolio, Patricia said. Denise has been aware of Marcus as her husband. She has not been aware of Marcus as the beneficial owner of the infrastructure her company has operated on for the past 6 years. Whitfield said something low and urgent to Denise. She didn't respond. Her mother, who had been silent in the corner of the room and who had never entirely trusted the shape of her daughter's ambitions, set down her coffee cup. Then Denise looked at Marcus, and her voice found a register he had heard before. Softened, apologetic, reaching for the version of him that might still be moved by her distress. "Marcus," she said, "we can work through this. I made mistakes. But we built this together. That has to count for something," his mother said, quietly, and without looking up from her hands. "You fired him from his own house." The room went still. Marcus gathered the documents in front of him into a neat stack and stood and buttoned his jacket. He looked at Denise with an expression that contained no anger, no satisfaction, no sentiment of any kind beyond the calm of a man who had verified every measurement and was confident in the structure. "You built your company on a foundation I laid," he said. "I know how to build things that last. I also know how to stop building for the wrong people." He picked up his briefcase and walked to the door. He did not look back. The room was still behind him. Denise sat at the table surrounded by the paperwork that mapped, with forensic precision, the exact shape of everything she had lost. 8 months later, Marcus was on the back porch of a house he had purchased in a quiet neighborhood in South Charlotte, sipping coffee from a white ceramic mug and watching the morning come in through the Japanese maple he had planted along the fence line in early spring. The leaves were starting to open. He had pressed the seedlings into the ground himself. In soil he had turned and amended himself, with the same deliberate attention he gave to anything worth keeping. The holding companies were now consolidated under a single group. A contract he had signed in the 5th month, after the divorce had added 11 new accounts and a licensing arrangement with a logistics firm out of Raleigh. He had also started mentoring 3 young engineers from a program at JCSU, meeting with them monthly, reviewing their work, giving them the kind of direct and unhurried attention that his own mentors had given him. There was a woman named Celeste who worked in municipal planning and who had asked him once, at a dinner Raymond had arranged without announcing it as an arrangement, what he did that made him seem so unbothered. He had thought about it genuinely before answering. She appreciated that. She was not performing ease, and neither was he. And that particular quality of honesty between two people was not something he took for granted. Denise's company had lost 7 of the 14 contracts inside of 60 days of the mediation. The board, once informed of the asset structure they had been operating within, had conducted their own review. Her position had not survived it. Craig Pemberton had resigned before he was asked to and was facing a separate civil proceeding over the vendor payment redirections. A colleague told Marcus, without pressing it, that Denise was doing marketing consulting for a mid-size property management firm. Marcus had heard that. He had registered it. He had moved on. The maple leaves moved in a morning wind that wasn't cold yet, but carried the memory of cold in it. And he drank his coffee and thought about the cabinet he was going to finish this weekend, and about the phone call with the Raleigh firm tomorrow morning, and about nothing in particular beyond the quality of the light on the fence and the way the yard looked when things had been tended over time. He had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.